That was all he said. My brother-in-law sat across the room with a crooked grin while everyone around him stared at their shoes. My fingers were still numb from the lake when I pulled up my banking app, expecting to handle a few pending charges. What I found instead stopped my heart. 5 years of savings. Wiped out in a single night. The number staring back at me was 0. I raised my eyes and found him already watching, glass in hand, his laugh cutting through the silence like a blade. They all expected me to fall apart right there on the dock. But something unexpected happened instead. I didn't break. I came alive. My name is Florence, and for most of my life I held tightly to the idea that family was something you could count on, something sturdy and real beneath your feet. I was raised in Portland in a small home that always carried the warmth of sawdust and fresh coffee on Sunday mornings. My parents owned a modest hardware store on the outskirts of the city, the kind of neighborhood place where longtime customers came as much to catch up as to buy anything. They taught me 3 things above all else: work hard, keep your promises, and never reach for what isn't yours. My younger sister Allison lived by an entirely different set of rules. She moved through the world as though it had a debt to pay her. While I spent my summers behind the store counter, she spent hers chasing parties, excitement, and anything that sparkled. Mom would sigh, Dad would smile, and I would quietly cover for her, convincing myself she only needed more time to find her footing. But the time we had ran out faster than either of us expected. Shortly after my 25th birthday, a drunk driver blew through a red light and took both of my parents in a single, senseless moment. The world didn't just shift, it hollowed itself out. We sat in an attorney's office days later, still barely breathing, as he walked us through what remained: the family house, the store, and a modest savings account. When everything was divided, Allison and I each received our share. I put mine into the boutique I had been quietly building toward for years. She put hers into Kyle. He entered her life the way a storm does, loud and fast and full of itself. He was the kind of man who talked over everyone and laughed too hard and carried a confidence that had never been earned by anything real. Within months, they were married. Within a year, Allison had changed in ways that were hard to name but impossible to ignore. She had grown quieter, smaller somehow, always scanning his face before she dared speak. I noticed. She waved it off. He just wants what's best for us, she would say, though the words never seemed to fully convince even her. The lake house gathering had been Uncle Robert's idea, a chance for the family to reconnect, to reset. I actually let myself believe it might work. I packed snacks and sweaters, and that particular kind of hope you only feel when you're desperate for things to be different. When I pulled into the gravel drive and saw the sunlight skipping off the water, it looked almost like a welcome. Emma was the first to reach me, and she leaned close before I even got through the door. "Just brace yourself," she murmured. Inside, I did my best to move through the weekend normally. I smiled through meals and made conversation, but Kyle's energy filled every corner of the house, loud and suffocating. And every time Allison glanced at me, I caught something in her eyes she couldn't seem to say out loud. The whole atmosphere felt pressed down, heavy, like the air before a storm breaks. I just didn't know the storm was already aimed directly at me. The first warning was so small I nearly talked myself out of it. My laptop was exactly where I had left it on the guest room dresser when I went downstairs to help Emma with dinner. But when I returned, the screen had shifted by a few inches and the charging cable was plugged into a port I never used. A minor detail, and almost nothing. But it landed on me like a cold hand on the back of my neck. Quiet, deliberate, wrong. I ran my fingers across the keys. The plastic was still warm. Someone had opened it. Someone had been inside it. I checked the browser history and found it spotless. Not empty in the way it gets when you haven't used it. Clean in the way it gets when someone deliberately erases their tracks. A slow prickling moved up my spine. I told myself to calm down, but my instincts had already made up their minds. Something here is very wrong. Later that evening, while everyone gathered around a card game in the main room, I reached for my phone to approve a routine payment for the boutique. Instead of the usual confirmation screen, I got a red notice, payment declined. I tried again. Same result. Unusual, but not yet alarming. Systems have glitches. I let it go for the night. Morning ended all of that. Claire called before I was fully awake, her voice tight and overly measured in the way people talk when they're trying not to panic. Florence, the vendor payment failed again, and your account is showing no available balance. My stomach lurched. That can't be right. But even as the words left my mouth, something deeper already knew. I opened the app. The numbers loaded. And then there was nothing where everything used to be. Not an error, not a delay, zero. I walked into the kitchen feeling like I was moving through fog. The smell of coffee and the sound of silverware felt far away, like they were happening in a different room of a different life. When I said the words out loud, "My money is gone," the table went completely silent. Uncle Robert shot to his feet. "What do you mean gone?" I held up my phone. Transferred out overnight. All of it. The gasps came, then the murmuring, then Emma was at my side with her hand on my arm. Two people didn't react at all. Allison stared into her mug as though she wanted to disappear inside it. And Kyle sat back in his chair with his arms crossed and his face completely empty. "Did you call the bank?" Emma whispered. "I did. They told me the password and security answers were entered correctly from a device already linked to my account." A hush spread through the kitchen like something cold rolling in off the water. I looked directly at Kyle. "You were near my laptop yesterday." I said it quietly, evenly. "Were you in my room?" Allison's head came up fast. "Are you accusing my husband?" Kyle exhaled a short, dismissive sound that was almost a laugh. "Maybe your bookkeeper made a mistake. Or maybe you just don't understand how finances work." I didn't flinch. "Show me your bank records," I said. "If you had nothing to do with this, you'd be louder than anyone here right now." His smirk moved just slightly, the first crack. "I don't have to prove anything to you." Allison's hands were shaking. She couldn't bring herself to meet my eyes. Kyle leaned forward then, and when he spoke, his voice was cold enough to make the room drop a degree. "We needed it more than you did." Everything erupted at once, raised voices and disbelief and chairs scraping back. I heard none of it. Inside me, something quietly locked into place, solid and certain and no longer afraid. This was not an accident. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a betrayal that had been planned, and I was done pretending otherwise. I don't remember sitting down, but at some point my legs gave out beneath me. My hands were ice cold, my breathing tight and shallow, but my mind was running clearer than it had in years. That's what real shock does. It strips everything away until only what's true remains. Allison was saying something across the room, her voice trembling, but I couldn't hear the words. All I could see was Kyle, relaxed in his chair like a man who had already decided how this story ended. He tapped his thumb lazily against his glass. That ease, that absolute certainty in his own invincibility didn't destroy me. It steadied me. I rose from my chair slowly. My legs weren't entirely reliable, but my resolve was solid. My hand found the strap of my bag hanging from the chair back. The leather was cool against my palm. When I lifted it, Kyle's eyes tracked the motion. Just for a second. Just enough. I paused and told him I hoped he wouldn't mind what was coming next. The room went still. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed louder. Kyle shoved back his chair and stood up fast enough to make it screech across the floor. "You are not calling anyone," he snapped, moving toward me. Before he crossed the room, Uncle Robert stepped directly into his path, shoulders back, voice flat and final. "Back off." Kyle laughed at him. "She's being theatrical. That money is gone, done. She will never see a single cent of it." The way he looked at me when he said it wasn't a bluff. It was the look of someone who had gotten away with things his whole life because no one ever pushed back. Allison stood from her seat, voice cracking. "Kyle, please." He didn't even glance at her. He grabbed her wrist and pulled her beside him like she was luggage, the motion so practiced and automatic it made my stomach turn, and I took a step toward her. "Allison," I said gently, "what's really going on?" Her eyes found mine, full of something trapped and exhausted. She opened her mouth. Kyle's grip tightened. "We're leaving," he announced. "Get your bag. Nobody is leaving," I said. My voice didn't rise, but it settled over the room like something heavy. "Not until my money is returned or the police arrive, whichever comes first." Kyle laughed again, sharp and theatrical. "The police? Go ahead, call them. Tell them your savings disappeared. See how much they care." He still believed this was his moment. He didn't realize it had already passed him by. Because while he had been performing, I'd been remembering something he didn't know about. 6 months earlier, after someone had attempted to breach my boutique's business network, I had installed a quiet security program on my personal laptop. It took photographs of any unauthorized user accessing my files. It logged every keystroke. It recorded device identifiers and attached a timestamp to everything, and it backed the data up automatically. If someone had sat at that laptop in the middle of the night, every second of it had already been saved somewhere he couldn't reach. I pulled out my phone. Kyle moved toward me. Uncle Robert blocked him again. I repeated myself softly. "I really hope you won't mind what's coming." Then I dialed. The dispatcher picked up on the first ring. I gave my name, the lake house address, and a clear description of ongoing financial fraud with a calm that surprised even me. Kyle waved his arms and kept laughing, telling anyone listening that this was absurd, that the police would take days to arrive, that I was embarrassing myself. But his smirk was slipping. A tension had entered the room that his confidence couldn't quite cover. I ended the call and put the phone away. "We'll wait," I said. Kyle spun toward Allison and told her to pack immediately. She didn't move.
You need to hear this.
Her fingers twisted into the fabric of her sweater and she stood completely still.
Ready to escape the city?
"Allison,"
Picture
I said
this.
quietly,
Rolling
"just tell them
hills,
what you know."
Towering trees.
Her gaze
and the
moved
open
between the
road
two of
ahead.
us, between
You're
my
in a
calm and
sleek,
his fury.
luxurious car,
She
the
opened her
engine
mouth.
purring like a
He grabbed her arm.
contented
"Don't say a single
The
word."
sun kisses the landscape.
Emma stepped
casting
forward.
golden
"Let her
hues
speak."
on every leaf and blade of grass.
Kyle turned on Emma with a look designed to silence her. But this time, it wasn't me who responded. It was Allison. She pulled her arm out of his grip with a force that seemed to surprise even her. Her voice broke open. "I am so tired, Kyle. I am tired of lying for you." The entire room stopped breathing. Aunt Patricia pressed her hand to her mouth. Uncle Robert's jaw went tight. Kyle stared at Allison like she had just done something unforgivable. Then the fury rose in him fast. "You stupid," he started, and never got to finish. Because at that exact moment, something hit the front of the house with a force that shook the walls. Picture frames rattled and fell. Everyone flinched, including Kyle. Emma whispered, asking what that was. I already knew. Seconds later, the front door swung open and cold morning air poured through the hallway. Heavy boots crossed the wooden floor. Voices followed. "Portland Police Department." "No one move." 3 uniformed officers entered the living room. Behind them came a woman in plain clothes holding a folder. "Detective Harmon." She looked at me directly. "Florence," I stepped forward. "That's me." She gave a short nod. "Your bank's fraud division flagged a series of suspicious transfers connected to your account. We received the alert, traced multiple login attempts back to this location, and have been building a file since early this morning." Kyle's voice came out fractured. "This is a misunderstanding. Someone must have accessed her laptop without our knowledge." Detective Harmon raised one eyebrow. "The logins came from a recognized device registered to this address." Uncle Robert's eyes drifted toward the guest room. Mine never left Kyle. He swallowed once and tried again, his voice losing ground with every word. "Lots of people could have used her computer. I'm sure someone else." "Good," I said simply. "Then you won't object to what's already documented." I handed Detective Harmon my phone. She opened the folder I had organized and began scrolling. Photograph after photograph of Kyle seated at my laptop in the early morning hours. The screen's glow casting across his face, his fingers moving deliberately across the keys. Every login attempt, every transfer command, time-stamped and intact. Her expression stayed professional, but her voice sharpened. "Mr. Henderson, turn around, hands behind your back." Kyle stumbled backward. "No, wait. This is completely insane. Two officers moved to him before he could reach the door. He struggled, he shouted, he called Allison's name like a command. Tell them, I didn't do this. But Allison wasn't moving toward him. She was standing beside me, tears running quietly down her face, her feet planted. You did it, she said. And you know that you did. Kyle looked at her the way people look when something they counted on finally collapses. You are worthless without me, he spat. You will fall apart without me. Detective Harmon's voice cut through the room. That's enough. The cuffs clicked into place. His wedding band struck the metal as his hands shook. You think this is freedom? He called to Allison as they moved him toward the door. You are nothing without me? You have always been nothing. Allison walked a step closer to him. Not to comfort, not to negotiate, but to say the one thing she had been carrying for years. I was nothing while I was with you, she said quietly. His expression cracked completely. Whatever performance he had been holding together finally gave way. And for the first time since I had known him, Kyle Henderson looked genuinely afraid. He called my name from the doorway like it was a threat. Lawrence, this is not over. But it already was. The moment the officers walked him out, the house exhaled. Aunt Patricia wiped her eyes. Uncle Robert's breath came out in a long, unsteady rush. Emma's hand found my shoulder, and then Allison came to me and folded into my arms. Not collapsing in weakness, but releasing something she had been holding upright for far too long. I'm sorry, she kept saying. I should have told you years ago. I should have left him. I just didn't know how to find my way out. I held her and told her it was over. I told her she was safe now. Detective Harmon returned a few minutes later and told me that with the evidence already in hand, I would likely recover the full amount, and that Kyle would face charges significant enough to keep him from threatening anyone for a very long time. I nodded and turned to look at the spot by the window where he had stood the night before, laughing like the outcome had already been decided in his favor. Today, the world had answered him, and it hadn't laughed. The lake house felt physically different once he was gone. Lighter. Quieter in a way that wasn't empty, but restful. The police vehicles disappeared down the gravel lane, and Allison and I stood on the porch together, watching the trees settle back into stillness. She looked fragile in the morning light, but not broken. More like someone who had just realized the sky above her was wider than she had been allowed to notice. The following week moved quickly. Detective Harmon called with updates as the bank reconstructed the transfer trail and traced every movement of the funds. When she confirmed that nearly all of the money would be returned and the remaining balance covered through fraud protection, I sat down on my bed and simply breathed. 5 years of work, still mine. Allison reached out to a friend with a spare room and filed for divorce shortly after. She moved into my apartment in the meantime, filling the spare corners with quiet apologies and the smell of late-night baking. There were evenings when the guilt came over her in waves, and I would remind her that surviving someone like Kyle wasn't a failure of judgment. It was endurance, and now she was finally choosing something different. A few weekends later, the family came back to the lake house, not to reunite, but to reclaim. We painted the porch railings and repaired the windows Kyle had damaged during one of his rages months before. We pulled back every curtain and let the afternoon light pour in. The house no longer felt like it was holding something dark inside it. It felt returned to itself. Standing on the dock that evening, watching the sun flatten out across the water, I understood something I hadn't been able to name before. Justice doesn't undo the damage, but it clears enough of the wreckage that something new can begin to take root. A month later, I was standing in my second boutique location as morning light stretched across the new displays like a quiet kind of victory. The money was back, the doors were open. For the first time in longer than I could clearly remember, I felt solid in the life I had built entirely by my own hands. Allison stopped by that afternoon carrying a box of pastries, her smile softer and more settled than I had seen it in years. She wasn't fully healed yet, but she was walking towards something real and entirely her own. Looking back at the lake house, at Kyle, at everything that shattered and everything that was slowly pieced back together, one thing remained absolutely clear to me. Sharing blood with someone does not give them the right to harm you. Knowing where your limits are does.